Then I would get to 100 pounds and then I would lose job because now I'm too skinny and I'm unrelatable and I look sick.
How did like the modeling sort of transition to the traveling?
In the modeling industry, I dealt with so much bullshit. Wonder where he is and how I just sometimes wait for his name to show up in a magazine. But I remember I got to the shoot and he was like, do you want to take a shot of tequila? And I'm like, no, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
He's like, well, maybe if you want to loosen up a bit. I'm like, I don't think so.
All right, episode 79. Here we are, May 15th, 2024. So, Katy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in Iowa in a really small town. I moved to LA when I was 19, so a very long time ago. And I since have traveled all over the world, and I was a model for years. Really fortunate and blessed to have done some really awesome kind of jobs doing that. Now I do real estate with the Oppenheim Group, which is
Big shout out. We love them.
So I'm doing that, and I have a travel blog. I'm kind of like this jack of all trades, so to speak, because
You're a Renaissance person.
I've had so many different jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
And tell us how many countries you're on right now that you've traveled to.
I've been to 101. Canada was 101, which is so ridiculous. People are like, how have you never been to Canada? You've been all over the world. And
what's the answer to that?
I honestly don't know. I just remember that I kept trying to go to Canada and something would come up, and then COVID happened. And then I was kind of stuck on 99 for a year. And I'm like, well, I can't go to Canada now because I don't want it to be country 100 because that would just be dumb.
Yeah.
So,
what was 100?
Tanzania. So I went to Zanzibar just back in February, the end of February. And so I finally got to 100 because I was stuck like on 95 to 99 for like a good year and a half. And I'm like, fuck, just get me to 100.
You get 100, yeah. All right. Have you ever been to East Africa?
Not really.
No?
I've been to Kenya.
Kenya?
But
Okay, yeah,
I
me
haven't
too.
been.
That's why I asked,
Yep.
Beautiful country. But
Yeah.
wanted to ask you a little bit about the traveling. Like, why did that become like so important to you? Like you've been to all these countries, but it's obviously not. I mean, of course you enjoy it, but it's there's more to it than that. Like, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I only actually flew on a plane for the first time when I was 18. I had never been on a plane before that. Yeah.
Okay.
I had never been out of the U.S. until I was 19. So for me, I grew up in a family that didn't really have a lot of money. I was never able to go on vacations I only saw the ocean for the first time when I was 18. So, I remember as a kid, my whole life, I'm like, man, there's so much and like there's such a big world and I'm never going to be able to see it, unfortunately. And I kind of just thought, no, you know what? I have one life to live. I'm going to figure it out how I can do this. And, I came to LA, and then I think my first country was Mexico, as are a lot of people's.
As happens.
And I just fell in love. I went and saw like the Mayan ruins and all that. And I'm like,
what part of Mexico are you in? Do you remember?
I just went like to Cancun, like Tulum, and I saw like the ruins there. And I also love history. I'm like a huge history nerd. Yeah. So so I was like, you know what? I really want to travel more. And I started traveling, went to Europe, went to these different places. And the more I did it, the more addicted I became.
Yeah.
And then it became, okay, my money, I'm not going to buy shoes and handbags. I'm going to like save my money for travel. And then I went through a divorce, unfortunately, in like the end of 2016, 2017. And I'm like, okay, I want to go to every country in the world. That's going to be my goal. But how can I go to those countries while also giving back or spreading a positive message or doing something besides just visiting? So I came up with this idea of I'm going to meet women in all these countries and I'm going to interview them about equality, empowerment, self-love, the negative effects of social media and media in general, and also, the negative effects of, body image and stuff like that. And so I basically went to 51 countries in 11 months, and I interviewed women in all of those countries. And, we talked about all sorts of things, and I got to know them and understand them. And you really realize how privileged you are when you
Yeah.
go to countries where there's war and famine and poverty, and you're like, oh my God, I have it so well.
Yeah, the
Like,
problems that we like talk about here.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh, it's just embarrassing. Some of the
Yeah.
things in this country that we're offended by and we're whining about. It's like, you know what? Please go travel.
Yeah.
And then you'll see problems.
Perspective is
Yeah,
everything.
truly.
And some of those countries that you travel, and you talked about the sort of the body image stuff, like in terms of like women empowerment. Like, what was so when you travel to other countries, so like here, at least in America, and I would say in the West in general, we talk on this podcast all the time, in fact, about how social media distorts like body image and like for women and for men too, but just sort of how that shapes like our perception of ourselves, of society. How is that dynamic different in like some of these other countries that you traveled in, like particularly like maybe like the Middle East or Africa or like some of these other places like where like that are very removed from Western culture, kind of at the opposite end? Like, how are the dynamics of social media and body image like affecting people there?
Well, I'm actually going to say that you would be surprised that they have the same issues. And I would say 80% of the women that I spoke to have had some type of eating disorder, some type of body image issue, whether it's body dysmorphia or starving themselves or wanting to lose weight. So the pressure is very real all over the world. This is not a Western thing. And I think because of social media, I mean, think about it. Almost every country, for the most part, has some sort of YouTube or Instagram or whatever. So they're still being fed all these distorted, unrealistic expectations of what beauty should look like,
Yeah.
So
Is that different? So you've traveled in the Middle East,
Yes.
and Middle East, obviously, as we know, generally Islamic conservative culture.
Correct. Yeah.
And there's also like censorship in some of those countries. So is the dynamic of like social media and how that affects people's like self-esteem different, or is it like still a problem there?
I would say it's still a problem. The only, the big difference is obviously in those countries, the women have to be covered up, right?
Yeah.
So here it's like, we love the hair and the makeup, and they really focus a lot on their makeup and especially their eye makeup, because that's what you can see through their burqas or their hijabs. But yeah, it's very different from a traditional religious stance in that they can't show off a lot of their body. So maybe if they are a little bit heavier, they don't have to worry about it because they're wearing these big burqas and, you're not going to see. But I'm sure there is still that pressure when they're home with the families from the husbands of like, you need to look great.
Have you been to Israel?
I have, yeah.
And what's the dynamic like there in terms of like, is it similar to Western culture in terms of the dynamic we're just talking about, in terms of how social media shapes people's like perception, particularly women, or is it more similar to the countries that are around Israel?
No, I would say Israel is very Westernized.
Okay.
I think Tel Aviv is an incredible city and it's so much fun. And I think
the clubs are fun.
Yeah.
Hey, Katy, can I ask a question? So we talked a little bit about the Middle East. So I know that in India, skin lightening is a big issue over there. And I'm wondering if that's something that you've seen in the Middle East as well, if that's an issue for women and their parents there, and the backlash that goes with that.
You know what? I personally don't know if I've ever seen in the Middle East where they do the skin lightening. But, it is funny that you mention about skin color, because that is something that's very different from country to country, right? Because some countries, like for me, I love being tan. Like even now, I'm so pale. I'm like, I feel so pale, right? Whereas a lot of these countries, India and even in, certain Asian countries, they do the skin bleaching. They don't want to look tan. They want to look pale because to them, the darker they look, they think it makes them look poor, because people with darker skin are typically people that are working in the fields all day, right? And in the sun. So it's better to be super pale because that means that you've been inside and you either have a job inside or you don't necessarily need to work. So it's so funny to see all the different brightening, lightening, bleaching creams in those countries, because I'm just like, well, here in America, we love to be tan, typically,
So in the course of your travels, obviously there's a lot of issues facing women around the globe, but what would you say outside of like the body image stuff, like are some of the bigger like long-term issues like sort of facing women equality for women like around the globe? Like what are some of the things you've identified?
Yeah, I would say just equality. I mean, I really didn't realize how much of an issue it was. I mean, obviously in the Middle East, that's a whole other ball game with equality because, I mean, they only were able to drive in Saudi a few years ago. Like women couldn't even have driver's licenses.
And they're going backwards in some countries, like Afghanistan, for instance.
I mean, it's crazy. And how a woman can literally be killed for adultery.
Yeah.
Like, and that's okay. It's literally
accepted.
Yeah. But I would say just equality in a sense of even in European countries, in Spain, in Latin countries, women do not get equal pay. And women are kind of expected to just, you stay home, take care of the kids, you know, keep up with the house. And if you do work, we're giving you 60% less than what a man in that same position would get.
Sure.
So it was really eye-opening to see the lack of equality that I think I was so, because in America, I'd say maybe it's not completely equal, but
maybe
it's pretty close, you know, but there's some countries that I'm like, even Spain and Portugal really surprised me. So.
And I haven't been to a lot of Central and South America. I've been to Mexico, Belize. That's pretty much it, I think. So in Central and South America, like the Latin countries, is that dynamic between men and women, like in terms of like equality and like social relations, more similar to like quote unquote like westernized like democracies, or is it more closer to what we see in like other parts of the world? Or is it just kind of its own like unique dynamic?
I would say it would be more similar to Western. It's not going to be as dramatic as some of the cultural shifts in Asia or the Middle East.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think women in the Latin countries, they still, you know, men really judge them. I think as a woman in America, you can wear the skirt and you can wear the makeup and revealing clothes. And you might get some guys catcalling you or, you know, judging. But like in the Latin countries, like,
it's ubiquitous.
It's like, you're a slut. Like, how dare you be so provocative? Like, cover yourself up.
Okay.
Except for Brazil. I feel like Brazil, they kind of just, you know.
Yeah.
You know, they do what they want. But
do their own thing on their own wavelength.
Yeah.
Enjoying this episode? Subscribe for more content on finding your own path to success. Every subscriber makes a huge difference to the pod, and we're grateful for everyone. And don't forget to throw us a classy like and comment too to let YouTube know that you're a fan of our stuff. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcasting.
I wanted to ask you too, so for the majority of your life, or not the majority of your life, but for the majority of your professional career, you were in the modeling industry, correct?
Yes.
So how was that experience like, and how does that like sort of shape, how did that like shape your approach to your travels and your desire to see, to like interview women and to learn more about like sort of like women's like rights across the globe? Like how did like the modeling sort of transition to the traveling?
Yep. So in the modeling industry, I dealt with so much bullshit. Like between photographers just being creepy and pervert. I mean, I've worked with, by the way, some incredible photographers, but I've also had some horror stories with photographers like definitely crossing boundaries. Not so much today, because I think there's this like kind of Me Too movement, and I think people are like definitely more careful. But
yeah,
I would say with that, with the constant rejection, you know, you're basically like going, like people are judging you based on your looks. Every single
like
audition, it's not about who you are as a person. If you're a kind person, who your soul is, it's literally just your looks. And you know, I remember like going into audition rooms and I would be like 110 pounds and they'd be like, nope, you're too big. And I'm like, what? I'm 5'7". I'm underweight for my height. But you definitely have to have thick skin because you're getting told no all the time. And I just got to a point where I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I so stressed out? Why am I in this job where nothing else is valued except for how I look? And so, and by the way, I also was seeing how false everything was in that industry. And I'm like, I need to get out of this. Like, I don't want any part of it. And so I decided when I would go travel, I would speak to these women, you know, that I interviewed as a friend with empathy, but also I really wanted to teach them, one, self-love and how important that is. And also, I wanted to teach them how they need to value more than their looks. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to get old. Our looks are going to go.
Yeah.
And as much as like I love putting on makeup and I value my looks and I take care of myself, I know that one day that's going to be gone, and you have to have more, and you have to value more. So I would really, in these interviews kind of be like, look, what do you love about yourself besides your aesthetic?
Sure.
What touches other people? If I spoke to your friends, what would they say about you? Because I know in my experience, I don't meet women and, if I talk about them in another room, I'm not like, oh my God, she's just so pretty. I'm saying, oh my God, she was the kindest person I've ever met.
Yeah.
She was so empathetic, so loving, so bright and bubbly. Those are the things I talk about.
What do you think about we did an episode with Ashton a while back where we read off a bunch of statistics towards the beginning about like the higher rates of mental health distress amongst models and eating disorders and depression, anxiety. Like, what do you think from your personalized experience? You talk about being like judged all the time and like the sort of the grueling effect that takes on someone is being like sort of it's all about how you look and it's not about your personality at all. Like what does that like do to someone's psyche and how do you think that affects people like long term? Like not even just like in the moment it like sucks, but like long term, like what are sort of the hangover effects of being judged like that all the time?
It's so weird. I feel like I'm getting quite emotional right now, and I don't. I think it's you just never feel enough, right? You never feel worthy. You feel like, I've lost jobs because I'm too big, quote unquote, at 110. Then I would get to 100 pounds and then I would lose jobs because now I'm too skinny and I'm unrelatable and I look sick. So it's like, you have to fit this tiny little, I guess, bubble. And you're like, it just feels like it's never enough, right? And you're like, I'm, again, just being valued on my looks. And I want to be valued on more than that. My kindness, my generosity, my empathy, my compassion, things like that. And that is just a superficial job that you will not be valued for. You know what I mean? And it's also... It's also a job where you feel so disposable. You are literally like, if you don't like it, we'll call the next girl in.
Yeah,
Get
there's always
offset.
someone waiting to fill your shoes.
Absolutely. And you have to take some of the abuse, and I don't mean like physical abuse, but like sometimes borderline sexual abuse and sometimes verbal abuse.
Yeah.
So, you just put up with a lot of shit. Everyone thinks modeling is this glamorous job. And again, I want to emphasize that I have been very fortunate because of modeling. I've gotten to see a lot of places and meet a lot of amazing people. That being said, my first big international job, I went to Indonesia and I had never really traveled by myself, that far away. And the producer, it was a French production, and the producer was so mean to me. I was there for 10 days. I cried every single day for 10 days.
Jesus.
Like I hated it. And then they offered me a contract in Jakarta to stay. And I'm like, I literally, because I could have made a lot of money, but I'm like, my mental health, I can't do it. I'm constantly like the punching bag for these men. And I can't handle it. I'm like, I want to leave.
Yeah.
And that was really difficult for me. And I remember I'd have to wake up at 4 a.m. in the mornings to shoot. And, I'd get yelled at for everything. Like I remember before one of the shoots, I got bit by a spider on my eye. And in the morning when I woke up, my eye was swollen and I was so scared to go down and tell them. And of course, when I did, they were like, what happened to your eye? And they're screaming at me as if I had any control of this spider bite. I'm like, trust me, this is just as uncomfortable.
It's like, I'm sorry for the spider.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do. It was just like stuff like that.
So I'd say in the past, like 10 years, some of the dynamics with like men and women, and not just modeling, but also like film have changed because of the Me Too movement, like Harvey Weinstein and, Bill Cosby, people like that getting exposed. Like, so tell us a little bit about like your experience in terms of like, you talk about like sort of the times where situations were borderline abusive or were abusive basically. Did that like shift at all over the course of like sort of that Me Too movement era, or are things sort of as bad as they've ever been?
No, I think in my experience, in the last few years have had no issues. I've worked with some really amazing, amazing photographers. I would just say, yes, the things that did happen that were, one thing was absolutely so inappropriate. And this was before the Me Too movement. And I sometimes wonder where that photographer, because he was a big photographer. He did a lot of like big campaigns. And I'm like, wonder where he is and how I just sometimes wait for his name to show up in a magazine. But I remember I got to the shoot and he was like, do you want to take a shot of tequila? And I'm like, no, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
He's like, well, maybe if you want to loosen up a bit. I'm like, I don't think so. And mind you, I was married during this time. So all of a sudden,
worse.
him and the makeup artist start taking shots together. And I'm like, okay, this is weird.
Yeah.
And then he starts talking about the model that he slept with the night before and like telling me these details. And I'm like,
I did not need to know.
Okay, I don't want to know this. And then it was a lingerie shoot. So I'm walking on set and he slaps my ass so hard that I had a handprint. And I was like,
Jesus.
my husband's gonna fucking kill me, even though I've done nothing wrong. And the whole shoot was just inappropriate jokes and like, oh, I need to take a picture of your boobs for my boob wall. And I'm like, what? Am I in
For
like
his
an alternate? He had a boob wall of like models that he had taken pictures of their boobs. Like all these girls, I guess they allowed it, or maybe he got them drunk. I don't know. But I was like, this is
Crazy.
so inappropriate on so many levels. And I told my husband at the time, but like to this day, I haven't said anything. And I'm like, I wonder how many other women shot with this photographer and maybe, did drink or something did happen. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, he's like the Larry Nassar photographer. It's just like.
Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, what the hell is going on?
Did you, what do you feel like that was kind of like the exception, or like from other models that you talked to were experiences like that is very commonplace?
I think, again, I was pretty lucky and I only had a few situations like that. But no, I've talked to a lot of models where I would say maybe LA wasn't as bad as what I heard took place in New York and London. I think there was a little bit more in kind of the fashion industry.
Okay.
Again, I can't really speak on it because it's not my experience. But I've heard some pretty terrible stories.
Let's shift gears a bit. So what caught my eye when we were like talking about preparing for this interview was obviously like the travel stuff, the modeling stuff, but also there's another cause that's very near and dear to your heart, which has to do with mental health and particularly like suicide awareness.
Yes.
And we did an episode, I think 2-3 months ago, with Cindy Coleman, who's the founder of Knowing You Matter, who founded a nonprofit after her own son committed suicide. And so this is a topic that's very, it's very relevant to this podcast and what we do at Stay Classy. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about like, why did this become so central to your life, and like, what are you doing about it now?
Yeah. So in 2009, my ex of 4 years committed suicide. It was the worst day of my life to this day. I think it was the worst day because up until then I had trauma, of course, but nothing that was just so severe that it just like changed the trajectory of my life. And, I woke up that morning and this was somebody that I was with who had threatened so many times, right? And I just kept thinking it's either for attention or like he's never going to do it. And then he would try. I mean, there were times that he did try and we would 5150 him, or he would be in a hospital and he would get out. And I was just thinking like, I can't be with this person anymore to keep them alive. I didn't think he'd actually do it. And of course, my life changed that morning, like I said. And, I lived for years with a lot of guilt and shame and like, why didn't he call me? He always called me, and he didn't call me that day. And, that was really hard for me. I just wrote a blog about it.
I saw it. Yeah.
Like a week ago. And I mean, writing that brought back so much. I think it was so much harder to like relive that experience. It was tough, but that was like watching someone with so much darkness struggle for so long that, now when I look back, I'm like, why did I not think he would do it? Like he had tried so many times, and if anyone was going to do it, it'd be him. He was just the most larger than life, courageous person, and, sometimes courageous in a not good way. And so, that changed my whole life in 2009. And so after that, I became a member of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I started my own little kind of support group back in 2009, where I would help people that were survivors or that were suicidal themselves. But that just became a lot. So I kind of was like, I can't do that anymore. It was obviously very fulfilling, but you take on a lot of energy and a lot of emotions that if you're not fully healed yourself, it's very difficult to kind of navigate. So now I just talk a lot about mental health and like why it's okay to not be okay. And I know that sounds cheesy, but like I'm so happy that this day and age we are kind of, getting rid of the stigma of like, guys can't talk about their feelings, because men more than women commit suicide. Women have a lot of, anxiety disorders, but men are the ones that typically go through with it, right? So when we look at those statistics, we have to ask ourselves, well, why is this happening? Because of a lot of pressure, but because so many men feel like they can't talk about how they feel. Men feel like they can't say, look, I'm not fucking okay. And we have to really create that safe space for them to do that, because I think that would help so much. We have to be empathetic. We have to be understanding and say, look, let's talk about this. Like, I get it. It's okay that you're not okay.
Yeah.
Like what's going on in your life. And so I'm happy that at least there's a shift.
It's just
happening.
shifting.
Hey there, Classy viewers. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We're dedicated to providing you with quality content that inspires and brightens your day. But keeping it classy can be expensive. If you enjoy our content, we're asking for your support for the podcast using the donation link in the description below. Donations mean the world to us, and even as little as $5 can make a huge difference in helping us make this podcast a reality. Plus, donors are added to our shortlist to be the first to receive exclusive offers on merch, extra content, and even chances to appear on the pod. Anything you can give would truly be appreciated. Now get back to enjoying the rest of the podcast, and as always, stay classy.
Well, let's talk about that. So one of my best friends, for instance, is a military veteran who got out of his tour recently. So coming back, I've noticed like the transition and the mental health challenges that veterans face. Now it's interesting because like from like the boomer generation or the generation before World War II, it's like pretty much ubiquitous. Like you don't talk about it, you don't share how you're doing, and sort of mental health was like it wasn't even like addressed. And then now we're in an era where it's much more like topical. Like, do you see things moving in the right direction in that way, or are we still like a long ways off from like where the dialogue needs to be?
I mean, I would say we're definitely moving in a better direction, but we have, I think, leaps and bounds still to go. But yeah, I mean, I do see more awareness. I see more men talking on podcasts as well about mental health and really opening up and being vulnerable. And I think that again is so important, because think of how much courage it takes. Not only people, but like a man who's supposed to be this strong man that, takes care of everything. Think of how hard that is to open up to somebody and really like put the raw parts of yourself out and be like, this is what I'm going through. I don't feel good. I don't feel happy. I don't feel worthy. I feel anxious. That's hard, And so it's like just having these conversations and opening up dialogue is at least a first step. And like letting guys know that it's okay and like, please do it,
Now on the dark side, like the reality is that suicide rates in America are higher than they've ever been before. What do you think's behind that? I mean, obviously it's not like one thing, it's comprehensive. What are some of the factors that you've like sort of identified and since the time that you became involved in this cause, like why is this getting so much worse, particularly in this culture?
I think social media plays a huge role. Social media and the internet in general. I think from children, because you see a lot of kids now committing suicide, like 7, 8, 9-year-olds, bullying. Yeah. It's so easy for people to be mean and cruel behind a keyboard, right? Yeah. By the way, those are people that are miserable themselves. And like they say, misery loves company. No one that is happy and confident with their life and busy like chasing their goals is going to sit and troll other people. Never. It doesn't happen. I'm telling you, the people that do that are like literally just projecting their own insecurities and their own misery. And that's what it is. But I would say bullying online, I would say social media and this constant comparison, this keeping up with the Joneses. Like we're always wanting more. We want that I think as humans, we're becoming so insatiable, right? Like we get something and then we're really proud of it, but it's not enough. Then we want the next thing and the next thing. And it's like, when is it just going to be enough to be happy and to feel loved and, to feel safe? All these like little things that we take for granted. And it's like, with social media, we're constantly comparing. Oh, well, this guy has a new G-Wagon. This guy's going on vacation. Oh, this guy has a great job. And I think for people, they don't feel enough if they don't have these material consumerist goods,
Now, it's interesting because the other day there was a big firestorm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. There was a big firestorm on Twitter because Harrison Butker, who's the kicker for the Chiefs, Rob, you might have heard about this, but he gave this like commencement speech. I forget the college, somewhere undergrad. Commencement speech about like traditional masculinity and sort of embracing traditional masculinity and how like men need to sort of return to their roots as like sort of leaders and like, taking control and like being strong and that sort of thing. And like how we're kind of getting away from that idea of like sort of the idealized man and how that's a bad thing, which he got a lot of backlash for. And I'm just wondering, like, in your opinion, do you feel like sort of the values that like underpin like our society for so long are kind of like falling apart in the way that like he talks about? Or do you think that has nothing to do with why we're seeing like this explosion in male depression, suicide? Like what do you think's the truth there?
Well, firstly, sorry, I'm just going to backpedal here. The other thing I meant to say is social media, because I feel like we're all connected on social media, but then we're all really lonely. Our real life, right? Do we have friends? Do we actually go out and do things with our friends? So I think there's a lot of loneliness. But as far as his speech, I didn't see it, but I don't think that he's talking about men need to go back to men and not talk about their feelings. I think it's more about this new culture of like everyone's so sensitive and everyone's offended and like men want to split bills 50-50 and men want to be chased by women, and it's more like men being in their feminine, because I'm really about masculine and feminine energy, and I think it's just about getting men back to their masculine. And I don't think that necessarily means we're not going to talk about feelings. It's just going to be like, we're going to be providers, leaders, we're going to make decisions. And I think also that women need to sit back in their feminine as well, because I think what's happened is this whole like, I'm a feminist and I'm just as great as a man and I want to open my own door and I want all these things. But it's like, well, you want all those things, but then you want a man to always pay the bill for you, and you can't have both, right?
Yeah,
so if you want to be a woman, like sit in your feminine and like allow a man to do that. So I think he maybe means just more like men being providers and leaders and making decisions and being kind of the head of the household in a way of like being supportive. But I don't think that necessarily means men can't talk about their feelings.
Katy, I think what you're saying is that there's some confusion between an idea of masculinity and then toxic masculinity. And I think that a lot of people that are influencers on the internet get that very confused because they're two different things. And one, what you're describing is positive masculinity. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Toxic masculinity is this whole other bag of nastiness that we're trying to get away from. And I think that's the distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. So I think like these people like Andrew Tate, like, preaching all this shit while I have watched some of his videos and he has made, and women don't kill me for this, but he has made a few points where it's almost like I get that point, but how you're saying it is horrible and
it's
whatever.
Like you're pulling a dime out of the garbage heap kind of thing.
Yeah, but like he is a definition of like toxic masculinity.
Toxic.
And we don't need that, No. Like it's, I don't know.
The guy calls himself the top G.
So there was a really interesting post that he made a couple of days ago. And what he basically said was, guys, if you're over 40 and you haven't had 5 kids yet, you might be gay because, that's not what your junk is for, right? So we've officially gotten to the point with the toxic masculinity influencers that having sex with women is now gay. I don't know how we got there, but that's where we are.
So Rob, are you gay then at this point?
I am super gay. I'm so gay. I'm gay like twice a day. It's great.
Twice a day.
Yeah, wife loves it.
Those are rookie numbers. Got to pump that up.
I'll do what I can. You're getting old.
See, I haven't seen a lot of his videos, so I don't know like just the garbage that he spews. But I did watch.
You're not missing anything.
Yeah, but I did watch some video where he's like, if you're a woman over 35, then you're basically fucking undateable, and I was like, well, I'm over 35 and I still feel great. And like, I
Yeah.
have I'm going to be happy. Like I'm chilling.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's so funny how like a man like that, you know, again, it's like just valuing women under a certain age for their looks.
Now, I'm wondering something else. So I was thinking about our conversation about like men's mental health. Now, we are in a time where talking about mental health is more accepted. Like, so to give an example. So my grandfathers both fought in World War II. You know, I didn't meet one of them. He passed away in his early 60s. But I was thinking about like, you know, my parents always told me, you know, that like they never talked about it. They never once mentioned like their experience in the war. And now we live in a time where it's very accepted to talk about it. It's very accepted to, you know, to have a therapist. You know, there's more therapists than ever before. Like, you know, which I think is a great thing, by the way. I think that the abundance of resources is a good thing. I'm not trying to downplay that. But it seems like even with the expansion of the dialogue, the problem just keeps getting worse. And I'm wondering, like, does it have to do with like sort of the underpinning, the values that sort of like underpinned this society for so long sort of changing or shifting or losing traction? Or is it more of the sort of the self-perception issues shaped by social media and that kind of thing? Like what do you think's going on there?
I mean, it's such a loaded question, but I mean, I would say perhaps the social media. You know, I think every individual is different. So I still think that there's so many men that don't want to talk about their feelings. They just don't want to do it because, again, maybe they grew up in a household where like, you just don't fucking do that. You be a man. Be a man. Don't talk about your feelings. You're not supposed to be sad. You're weak. If you're sad, you're weak. If you're anxious, you're weak. So I think that it's more just about, again, not feeling comfortable to do that. But
do you, what do you think is, so there's like we've talked about the challenges of social media, but like for instance, I'm thinking about like for people who are practically thinking about like suicide prevention and mental health and these sorts of things, it's hard to identify because you never know when someone's struggling, or sometimes you can tell, but it's very difficult. For instance, as I've shared on this podcast many times before, one of my best friends committed suicide at the age of 20, and like there were no signs, there was no buildup, nothing, and I feel like that's the case for a lot of people, is that like you don't see it coming. And so like practically for people who are trying to support loved ones, trying to support friends, family members, what have you, like what are some of the things that you've learned are sort of identifying points and like helping points where it's like, okay, like you might not be able to predict if it's coming, but you can still take these practical steps to support people in your life who may be at risk. Like what does that look like?
So I think for me, you know, one thing I always kind of like let my friends know, like, hey, I'm thinking of you. How's it going? What's going on? You know, especially if it's somebody that I haven't talked to for a while, I always try to like, you know, reconnect with them and see how they're doing. You know, and always let people know how loved and valued they are. I think that it's something, again, that maybe it looks like weakness if you're too nice and like, you know, I think it's really important to tell people how you feel. I'm somebody like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I don't need to act tough. I don't need to have this like exterior that I'm like too good or too cool. I'm like, oh my God, I love you. I love being around you, like whatever it is, right? And so I think it's really important to just let people know how much you care about them, how much they, you know, impact your life. Like on my birthday this year, I wrote some of my friends and I'm like, hey, I just want you to know I am so grateful for our friendship. Like my biggest commodity in my life is my relationships and my friendships. And you mean a lot to me. And, you know, because it's important to hear sometimes, right? And I also pay attention to people's words and I kind of read between the lines when I have dialogue with people. And I think sometimes that's hard for some people that wouldn't have that kind of past of suicide. But for me, because with John, there, besides the warnings, you know, sometimes I would just notice where he wouldn't show up to something or he wouldn't want to come to something. And I'd be like, hey, like, what's going on? Is everything okay? But you're right. Sometimes you just don't know. You know, you can't know. But in John's situation, the pastor, when we had his funeral, came up to me and he said, you know, John came into this church 2 weeks ago. He sat in the back by himself and he had never been here before. And as a pastor, that should have been on my radar to be like, okay, there's a guy in his early 20s that's never been here before. He's sitting all the way in the back alone and just leaving quickly. Maybe I should go up and chat to him, right? And, you know, I mean, it's always easier to, you know, in hindsight, I shoulda, coulda, woulda. But
that could be a trap itself.
I know. I know.
So I wanted to ask you too, like with mental health, like and what you're doing now, like what are some like if somebody's like, you know, this topic is like very important to me and it's very important to a lot of people, like what are some like practical ways, like maybe particular organizations or things that people can do to like practically, you know, be a part of the solution, like to like get involved? Like what does that look like?
I mean, it depends. So the American Foundation has walks that you can do, like Out of the Darkness walks. I think for me, something that kind of healed me was, you know, helping getting funding for certain projects that prevent suicide. So the first project I ever did after John died was basically emailing a bunch of representatives in San Francisco to try to get a barrier on the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, this is something that no one like the locals were like, it's an eyesore. It looks like shit. If someone wants to kill themselves, they're going to kill themselves anyways, if there's a barrier or not. And it had been shot down so many years in a row. And then finally, a woman was on the board who had lost her son to suicide. So she was kind of like one of the determining factors of if they were going to get that, you know, that funding or not. Now, I don't know if that project has went through because this was years ago.
Still in process.
And yeah, and I heard that people were like, no, it's not up. But then I heard it was. And but just little things like that, like writing your state representatives and like, you know, whether it's asking for fundings or laws, things like that, support groups, super helpful. And honestly, just hotlines. You can volunteer. Now it's pretty deep and heavy to be on the other end of a hotline. But if it's something that you feel like you can do, you know, that's an option. There's just so many organizations and charities that you can be a part of depending on how much or how little you want to be involved in the actual process.
Did you subscribe yet? If you like our content, it's the easiest way to support the pod. Hit the subscribe button on the bottom right and keep it classy.
Absolutely. And then one thing I wanted to ask you is for like, so the modeling experience like sort of shaped your views on like travel and that sort of thing and your desire to be involved in women's empowerment, but like talk about the relationship between modeling and mental health like a bit, like because I think that it would be remiss to not talk about this connection. We've been talking about mental health for a few minutes now, and there's a huge connection between as we talked about like the self-esteem stuff and like the anxiety, the depression that models feel. Like talk about like your personal like journey with like the relationship between your own modeling career and mental health and sort of what you've learned from that.
Yeah. So when I first moved out to LA, I was super confident. I mean, and I guess it's easier when you're coming from, you know, they always say like, are you, you know, a small fish in a big pond? Are you a big fish in a small pond? You know, so I guess coming from Iowa, I was kind of like, I was doing the local modeling and I was in on the fashion show and I felt really confident and really good. And then I moved out to LA and suddenly every girl is beautiful, right? And thin and, you know, what a woman should look like. And I was going to these castings and, you know, being told no, but not only no, it was like, it's a constant critique of your body, your face, your smile, your nose. And it's like there was a lot of pressure. And I remember just feeling like, well, man, I thought I was pretty, but maybe I'm not pretty, you know? And you really have this like moment where you're like, well, geez, like, well, what do I do? Like, do I need to get these surgeries? Do I need to get enhancements? You know, and there's a lot of, you know, pressure on that. And then maybe you will get one of those surgeries and you're still getting no's and you're just like, so it's kind of like this chase of like, well, what do I do? You know, and then the girls that, you know, stay their natural selves, which I love that. And I think like I love that French women are just so natural and like they have just like that je ne sais quoi, like that I don't give a fuck, I'm confident, I don't need all that stuff. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting off track. But yeah, no, just being in LA, like it really was difficult. And then also like I'm trying to pay my own bills. I'm not booking jobs. I call my parents. They're like, well, maybe you need to come home. And I'm like, then that means I failed and I don't want to fail. So I need to figure this out. And I think, you know, a big part of it was like that I just kept showing up, but I kept showing up while my mental health was really declining. And so I took a break. I moved to Europe and I lived in Europe for 4.5 years with my ex. And I pretty much stopped modeling. and I just started writing and learning and kind of just supporting his career. But I remembered the older I got and the more wiser I got, I became more self-aware. And then I kind of got this confidence because I felt more like a woman and more comfortable in my own skin. So that's when I came back to LA and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try this again. I'm going to do this whole modeling thing again. I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm going to like do my best. I'm going to work hard. And that year I remember, because I was so just unapologetically myself and I didn't care and I didn't let all that noise get into my head, I booked more jobs at 30, more magazine covers, more anything than the last 5 years of my modeling career before I quit.
Oh, wow.
And it was crazy how I just had to, you know, really silence all that outside noise and be like, you know what they're saying about me, that's on them. Like, that's their opinion, whatever. Like, I'm not going to let that devalue myself, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said, it was a struggle. Oh my gosh, I was anxious. I felt super insecure. And I think that's the hardest, you know, when you walk into a room and you feel insecure and you're like, oh, are people looking at me? Am I as skinny as her?
Yeah.
And, you know, there's this comparison. And again, with social media, that made the comparison that much, you know, that much worse, right? And then also when social media came, I would walk into a job with, you know, what I think is a really great modeling resume. And then they would say, well, how many followers do you have on Instagram? You know, and I don't know, maybe then I had like 20 or 50.
It almost seems like a childish question, but now it's like ubiquitous. Like
yeah,
people get
I mean,
gauged on that.
Yeah. And so I would say, well, you know, I have 25,000 followers, but I've been in Sports Illustrated, I've been in Glamour, I've been in Men's Health, and they would be like, well, no, we're going to go with the girl with 2 million followers, even though she's not really done many professional modeling shoots and maybe it's a bunch of selfies and whatever, but she has 2 million followers. She's going to get the job over me. And that really messed with my head for a while because I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I worked so hard in my career to get these jobs and to have this amazing CV, and that doesn't even matter now. You know, so there's always a shift, and, you know, you just have to, I think, be so comfortable in your skin and just so emotionally mature and aware that you're like, I'm not going to let any of this bullshit get into my head.
Fair enough.
So
tell us a little bit about 101 countries and counting, because I'm sure you'll go to more.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about, as we close, like some of the highlights, some of the, you know, we've been kind of talking about some heavy stuff for a while, but talk about some of the positive experiences, some of the highlight traveling, like maybe like this was like a really cool trip, or like something happened along the way that you could like spin us a little story for. So
yeah, I have a lot of really great travel stories, actually. But I would say, okay, so my favorite countries, I'll just throw that out because everyone asks me that question. Like, what are my favorite countries? So my favorite countries are Peru, Jordan, Sri Lanka, and Iceland. I would say those are like just so incredible. They're beautiful. The food is amazing. The people are great.
Yeah.
Like, I love those countries. As far as travel stories, okay, so I have a couple, but I'll just share. Okay, so I was in Bosnia, and I wanted to see, you know, the sunset. And they told me, you have to go to this Turkish mosque to see, this is the best view of the sunset. So my girlfriend and I we're rushing to get to this mosque, and we get there and we're like, oh, we need to go up. And he's like, the guy was like, it's crowded. There's too many people, but when 2 people come down, you can go up. And I'm like, no, please. Like, no one's going to come down before sunset. Like, just please let us go up. And he was like, okay, fine, go. And we were like, okay, do we need tickets? And he was like, just pay when you come back. So we didn't get, so this is where the story, okay, so we never got, so when he was giving people tickets, he would give you a ticket and he would rip it off and he would keep one and put it on a board. Okay, we don't get 2 tickets. So we run up, we're up there, watching the sunset, eating Turkish delight, like just loving life, right? Yeah. Slowly people start going down the stairs and leaving. And we're just up there like having the time of our lives. And then we become the last people up there. And then I noticed that the staircase, the lights turned off. And I'm like, well, maybe they're automatic stairs, like lights on the stairs. Why would they? It's an old mosque. Why would they have automatic lights on the stairs? So we stay up there not thinking about anything. And then as we're leaving, I'm like, okay, let's go. All the lights are off. on the stairs. So we're on this like skinny spiral staircase coming down. And then I noticed the next room, all the lights are off. And I just got this feeling of doom. And I'm like, oh no, like we're locked in here. So we get to the bottom, all the lights are off. There's like chain around the doors. All the windows are like, you know, there's like the metal bars. And this isn't, by the way,
trapped inside the mosque.
We're trapped in the mosque, and this isn't a mosque that they use anymore for prayer time. So then prayer time starts, but everyone goes to the other, like the newer mosque, because this was the oldest one in the city. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, I'm like panicking. I'm freaking out. I have to pee. I'm about to pee my pants. And I'm like, well, I can't pee in this mosque because that's super disrespectful. Yeah. I have no water. My phone's dead. So I'm like literally having a fucking meltdown. And finally,
time to pray.
One lady is walking by and I just start screaming and I'm crying because at this point I'm like, what if he did it on purpose and they're going to come back at 2 a.m. and we're going to be sex trafficked? And I got all this crazy shit in my head. And so I'm like, I'm yelling at the lady and she doesn't speak English, but I'm like, I'm trapped. Look, I'm trapped.
Yeah.
And so she had to run and like, you know, find the guy, but they can't find him because, again, it's prayer time. So they're like, well, he's praying, but we don't know what mosque he's at. So you're just going to have to wait. And I'm like, but I have to pee so bad. Like, I'm totally panicking. And then finally, after like 2 hours, he comes with the keys. And by then there's like, you know, because I think a lot of people had heard. So there's like 30 locals behind him, all like this parade of people.
It's a huge scene.
Oh my gosh. And so like we came out and he was like, go and never speak of this to anyone. And we're like, okay, bye. And we like run. And then of course I had to tell everyone because it was such a crazy story.
Yeah.
That I was like, oh my gosh. So that's one of my favorite travel stories. And then my other one, briefly, I was in Georgia, in the country Georgia.
Yeah.
So this is, you know where Georgia is. Okay. Yeah.
Near Russia.
So yeah, like next to Armenia.
Okay.
So I'm there with a girl that I met, Georgian, but we had a mutual friend in LA. Anyways, we're in this van driving to a vineyard, and it's like, you know, we're going to the vineyard for sunset. Again, sunsets just get me in so much trouble. So we're in this van. The van hits a pothole. So we blow out both tires on the side, on the driver's side. So we get out, and I mean, they don't have they don't have 2 spare tires, and we're in the middle of freaking nowhere. It starts getting dark. So we start hitchhiking or trying to hitchhike. Yeah. No one's picking us up. So I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what are we going to do? I had no cell service. So I'm like, do we start walking back to Tbilisi? Like it's a 50-minute drive, an hour drive. So finally, this man comes with his pregnant daughter, and he's like, you know, he picks us up. And we go back to their home because they lived in like the local village. And they start like giving us wine and like this food. And I end up just getting so drunk with this family because the traditions are they give you wine in this glass that has like a cone. And so you can't put it down. So you like, okay, we sip red wine, right?
Yeah.
No.
You can't set the cone down, no.
You don't. So you cheers with it, and then you have to like, you take it as like a shot.
Oh,
otherwise,
geez.
it's bad luck because they're saying you're leaving the blood of Christ in the cup.
Oh.
So I'm like, okay, well, I don't.
And they're Catholic, right? So it's like for them, it's
so I'm
literally
like,
the blood of Christ.
So I'm like, I don't want to leave the blood of Christ. So, you know, and they keep doing all these cheerses, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't take any more, please. Like,
oh my goodness.
I literally, and I remember at one point I was like crying because the man's like, I'm going to name my daughter Katy because you're such a sweet girl. And, you know, I have this, my baby daughter, like granddaughter is going to be born and we're going to name her Katy. And I'm like crying and I'm like, and it was just an absolute circus. But like they were so kind, gave us food and wine. And I mean, we were there for like 4 hours and I have all these photos with them. And finally we got like a tow truck to help us. But yeah, it was pretty crazy.
It's quite an experience.
So, yeah.
So one other question as we close. You've done a lot of traveling and you're also a history person. So I wanted to ask you this. Out of all the countries you've traveled, all the different societies you've seen, who would you say is your favorite dictator? I'm just kidding. No, my
favorite dictator.
No, my actual question is this. That was just a joke. But like, if you had to say like, out of all the different societies you've traveled to, like, commonalities and differences alike. What is like one like overarching observation, just like about the world you could leave us with in terms of like just like sort of the way the world is progressing, like especially we've been talking about like women's rights, women's empowerment.
Yeah.
Just like one sort of overarching observation about just like sort of the way societies are progressing. It can be in the sort of positive or negative, just anything that comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that people want to help you more than they want to hurt you. So I say that because I've been to a lot of countries that are dangerous, or do not travel, or Katy, do not go there, you'll get killed, kidnapped, raped, whatever, right? Like a lot of random off the beaten track countries. And my experience in some of those countries has been so beautiful and hospitable. And so I just basically want to say, like, again, people typically want to help you and they don't want to hurt you. They take pride in their country and where they came from and in their cultures. They want you to love it as much as they love it. So I would just say, like, my experience so far, knock on wood, has always been, pretty pleasant. And to like, don't listen to what the media says about certain places, because a lot of it's sensationalized and, it's clickbait and
More stories,
yeah, you're probably going to hear the worst stories. It's just like if, there's a million stories I could tell you about LA and things that happen in LA, but I still feel safe there, you know? And I've been to places where, again, they were like, oh my God, Katy, you will literally get killed. And I went there and there was no issue. So I think that, again, people are kinder. Yes, on the odd chance you might run into an absolute lunatic, right? But I think that can happen anywhere. So it's just believing in people and I don't know. That's
All right.
what I do. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, in closing, for people who want to follow your traveling experiences, keep track of what you're doing, how can people reach you? What's your social media and that kind of thing?
Yes. So my website is www.iamkatyjohnson.com. And that's the same with my Instagram at iamkatyjohnson.com, Katy. My mom had to be annoying and spell it differently than everyone else, so I could never get personalized pencils as a kid.
I have the same sort of dynamic with like Steven, because it's like with a PH.
Yeah.
Everyone's like Stefan. I'm like, no. Steven.
Yep. So annoying. So that's my website. There I write blogs on travel, ultimate guides, packing tips, and occasionally I just wrote about mental health. And I was actually thinking about, now that we're talking about like vulnerability and opening up, I was going to do a section called Candid with Katy, where we just chat about real life shit, no sugarcoating, no worrying about like offending. Obviously, I'm kind to everyone and I believe in equality and everything else, but like having real life conversations where we can, chat openly about a topic and
filter.
like no filter, not be worried about being canceled, because that's like an issue in itself.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, but yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Katy, for coming on today. Really
Thanks
appreciate
for having
it.
me.
And what's your next country? What's next for you?
You know what? I would say I have a list. I'm hopeful to go next to Mongolia, Bhutan, and then I want to get some countries in Africa done. So like I'd love to go to Namibia, Botswana, where else? Zambia and Zimbabwe also. So those are kind of like my top list. But
all right, let's make it happen.
Yeah,
keep us updated.
totally.
All
Thank
right,
you so much.
Great, awesome.
Appreciate
That's a wrap,
you.
guys. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy Podcast with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, you can find all of our content at our website at stayclassypod.com. And thanks to our production sponsor and partner, MaxLux Media. You can find them at maxluxmedia.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Every subscription helps and goes a long way towards ensuring that we can continue to produce content for viewers like yourself. Thanks so much. Stay classy.